claims as opposed to theological claims of intelligent design. I'm afraid they're fairly thin. There's really only two ideas in the science of intelligent design. One of them is Michael Behe's idea of irreducible complexity. The other is Dembski's own design inference or complex specified information or specified complexity. Now, Dembski will say that irreducible complexity is really a subset of CSI, and that may be the case. In Dembski's version of ID, he's really talking about probability. In Behe's version, he's really talking about complexity, but in many respects, probability is a stand-in for complexity because something that's really, really, really improbable is likely to be really, really, really complex, so they're kind of the same thing. I'm going to talk about Behe as my example tonight. Now, Mike Behe likes to use the mousetrap as an example of something that is irreducibly complex. So let's talk about the concept of irreducible complexity. Here's a mousetrap. Mousetrap has 5 parts. Pretty simple structure. It's got a hold-down bar, a hammer, a platform, a catch, a spring. Kenner, you know, the cheese is optional. We don't have to have cheese in there. But now, Mike says that in order to catch a mouse, which is the function of a mousetrap, you have to have all 5 of these parts. If you take away any one of these parts, you can't catch mice. The mousetrap is irreducibly complex in the sense that all 5 parts have to be together or nada, or you can't catch mice. And he uses this as an analogy for something like the 40 or 50 proteins of the Bacterial Flagellum. All those proteins have to be together, otherwise the bacteria is dead in the water. It just lies there and can't go anywhere. Well, if you go on the web, as I'm sure some of you have actually done at one time or another, and you Google Behe mousetrap, you will find that there has been a cottage industry of coming up with reduced mousetraps. So here's a 4-part mousetrap, which you could catch mice, and here's a 3-part mousetrap, which I guess you could catch mice with, and here's a 2-part mousetrap, and I guess this one, the mouse is supposed to just impale itself on you. But let's face it, I mean, Mike is not really interested in mousetraps when you come right. He's really much more interested in structural complexity in biological structures, such as the bacterial flagellum, which is, admittedly, a very complicated structure. By the way, the bacterial flagellum is this little tail on the back end of a bacterium. And by the way, I'll be talking about the bacterial flagellum. There's no such thing as the flagellum. There's about 40 different kinds of flagellae. One flagellum, several flagella, right? It's neutral. 3 years of high school Latin. See? It's not a bad thing to take. Flagellum, one flagellum. There's a whole bunch of different flagellae, and they have different structures. Unfortunately, in most of the intelligent design literature, they're acting as if there's only one kind, and that's just wrong. But anyway, and it doesn't look quite that spiffy either. I mean, this is actually a composite microphotograph of several different shots from several different angles, and this is probably as good as it gets. So, you know, the previous picture showing all these carefully labeled parts is perhaps maybe, you know, presenting the flagellum as being a bit more machine-like than it actually is. But it's still a complicated structure. Everybody admits that. Okay, here's the idea of irreducible complexity. The idea is that all the parts have to be together before a structure will work. Therefore, says Mike, a bacterial flagellum cannot be produced gradually. Any irreducibly complex structure cannot be produced gradually through the incremental, piece-by-piece process of natural selection. And by the way, if there's any molecular biologists around, you're saying, that's not how a flagellum works. Flagellum work like this. They don't undulate. I got it from a creationist site. What can I say? So the argument is that there's no selective value in this component being put together with that component being put together with this component being put together with that component, and so forth. Unless there's a selective value at each of these stages, natural selection can't put together something that's irreducibly complex, okay? So, therefore, really complex things like bacterial flagellum have to be put together all at once. like a car. ID proponents are very fond of using the analogy of something made by humans, like an artifact, like a car, for complex biological structures. And just like a car is assembled all at one time, it is a purposeful arrangement of parts, as it were. So also they view something like a bacterial flagellum as being put together all at one time, because it can't be put together piecemeal, right? Irreducible complexity means you can't put things together piecemeal. It has to be put together all at one time. It's a purposeful arrangement of parts, is the phrase that Behe used to explain something like an irreducibly complex structure. Think about this. A purposeful arrangement of parts is really special creation. This is a fancy way of trying to disguise what is basically a religious point of view. The point being here, but if we are discussing this from a scientific standpoint, the idea of irreducible complexity has been rejected by biologists who have looked at this, who know something about molecular biology, because a component that had another function might actually change its function or be combined with another component through natural selection to produce a structure that at the end might look irreducibly complex, but which actually had functional features along the line. And when you actually look at structures like the bacteria flagellum, the parts that make up the flagellum do in fact exist elsewhere in the cell. They have other functions. They are available, if you will, to be co-opted, shall we say. And this is only obviously a very short series, a small number of the components. A lot of times the intelligent design people act as if there really is no research going on in this, and that this is just, throw up your hands in despair. This is such a complicated process. There's lots of people doing work on complicated structures, including the bacterial flagellum. As an analogy for this kind of process, let's consider Behe's favorite example, the mousetrap. What if parts of the mousetrap had other functions? Let's say you only had a spring, a hammer, and a platform. Well, you could make a pretty spiffy tie clip, perhaps. You could make some really painful earrings. If you only had two parts, let's say you only had a spring and a platform, you could make a paper clip out of it. And if you only had the hold-down bar, you could make a fish hook or a kind of icky toothpick, I guess, depending on what you used it for beforehand. The point being that the components of a mousetrap, the components of a bacterial flagellum might have other functions, might have other uses, and be able to be incorporated should new natural selective functions and pressures arise, so to speak, to repurpose them for another cause. But we don't actually even have to do this theoretically, because we actually have research by people who have done just that. Where are we here? Oh, Palin and Matsky in, goodness, I don't have the, I apologize here, I don't have the reference for this article. Have in fact, how embarrassing, because Matsky used to work for me, and I should actually know the reference for this right away, right off the bat. This was in Nature Biology. I will find it. Anyway, Google Palin and Matsky flagella, and it'll come right up. It's a very, very widely cited article. What they did in this article is they looked at the homologs between the various components of the bacteria flagella across a variety of flagella. Again, there's more than just one flagellum, right? And they were able to piece together a very plausible series of stages by which you could construct a very reasonable 40-protein bacterial flagellum. Anyway, it's not like this is a big mystery. There's work going on, and there's a lot of very interesting research going on to try to solve these problems. Joe Thornton's work on glucocorticoid receptors, this is a protein that binds cortisol. This is really interesting work. He and his lab was able to show literally mutation by mutation steps for forming this molecule from another protein that originally had a completely different function, mineralocorticoid, the MR receptor. Now, this is a complex protein that evolved from a completely different protein through the process of natural selection and drift. He was able to figure out step by step how you get from A to B, a complex molecular machine, irreducibly complex, it works. This is not something that he's simply wrong when he says that this sort of thing can't be done. Another example, just from last fall, Lithgow and his colleagues working with the TIM complex, which is kind of an interesting, another one of these molecular machines, okay? This is a machine that has to do with protein transport into mitochondria. Now, mitochondria, if you remember, those of you who are biologists or biology students, mitochondria are these organelles within eukaryotic cells that got there basically in very ancient eukaryotic cells by being they're ancient bacteria that got incorporated into eukaryotic cells, sort of hijacked and through endosymbiosis were incorporated into the cells that you and I have. And now they're nice little engines that create energy for us. But bacteria cells don't have this TIM complex. So where did the TIM complex come from? So using this kind of evolutionary research, what Lithgow and his laboratory did was they went to the closest relative of one of these ancestral, something that was close to that ancestral bacterium that was engulfed by that early eukaryote. And they started looking for sequences that would be similar to the TIM proteins. And they found some. And they were able to reconstruct a plausible scenario to go from the proteins in those bacteria relatives up through something like the TIM complex. That is just really, really cool research. Okay, here we got it again. A molecular machine can have an evolutionary history. Irreducible complexity is not a concept that evolutionary biologists or biologists in general find to be useful for understanding nature. It is superfluous, and it's superfluous at best and wrong in most cases. In this article, the authors pointed out that Francois Jacob described evolution as a tinkerer, cobbling together proteins of one function to yield more complex machines capable of new functions. Our work describes a perfect example of Jacob's proposition and shows that Darwin's theory of evolution beautifully explains how molecular machines came to be. Just another quick example here. Stephen Meyer and other intelligent design proponents often claim that new genes can't evolve because new information, they never really define information, can't occur without the infusion of intelligence. In my opinion, this is just a fancy way of saying creationism, frankly. And yet, no evolutionary biologist thinks that new information is a chance process. And there's actually quite a literature out there about how new information is acquired. I mean, this is just some articles I had lying around. They're not even especially new ones. You can just sort of guess by the titles. There's a lot of research going on. There's a review article by Long where he talks about a variety of mechanisms like exon shuffling, lateral gene transfer, gene fusion, fission. Take a look at the references column there. He's got a bunch of numbers. There's a whole bunch of articles referenced, and quite a few. There's over a dozen by the time you get to the bottom of a couple dozen by the time you get to the bottom of the article, where actual research showing how new genetic information is being produced through these various kinds of mechanisms. I mean, intelligent design proponents either are not aware of the literature or it's just MSU, making stuff up. Either way, there's a very good reason why nobody pays any attention to them in biology. But I also want to call your attention to something that we've run into before. If you've noticed, the whole structure of the intelligent design argument is evolution can't do the job, therefore intelligent design, right? Evolution can't explain natural selection, can't explain the bacterial flagellum, therefore intelligent design explains the bacterial flagellum. This is the same old creation science two-model approach. Evidence against evolution is evidence for, in this case, intelligent design, but it's an argument that you've heard before. Now, I mentioned to you that we'd be coming back to Edward versus Aguilar to come to where we are today. And I just wanted to remind you about, this is the case, remember, that struck down equal time for creation science, the old case back in 1987. This was bad news, clearly, for creation science, because obviously that was the end of their trying to get taught by law in the public schools. It's still being taught together and young, but at least by law they can't require it to be taught. But there was a glimmer of hope in the wording of the decision, but also in a dissent by Justice Scalia. Justice Brennan wrote the decision, and he wrote that teachers are certainly have the legal right to teach the scientific alternatives to evolution. And of course, that's absolutely true. Teachers can teach the scientific alternatives to gravitation. They can teach scientific alternatives to the cell theory. They can teach scientific alternatives to heliocentrism. They can teach scientific alternatives to evolution. There just aren't any. If there were scientific alternatives to evolution, obviously teachers could teach them. You'll notice if you go to the universities, including, by the way, Brigham Young and Baylor and Notre Dame and Texas Christian and the other well-regarded sectarian institutions in this country, they are not teaching alternatives to heliocentrism. They are not teaching alternatives to evolution. They are teaching evolution the same way your professors here are. They are teaching that evolution is the inference that living things have common ancestors. They are teaching that natural selection explains a great deal of it. They are teaching that many other evolutionary mechanisms also contribute to producing this terrific array of the variety of living things that we have today. Evolution is not being debated. We don't debate whether evolution took place in the world of science. We argue about the details. We argue about how important some mechanisms are versus others. We argue about the details of the tree of life, but nobody's arguing over the whether. And that, of course, is what the creationists want to pretend we're doing. They want us to pretend to students that scientists are having this big debate over evolution being a theory in crisis, and that simply is not happening. But Brennan is certainly correct. If scientists were indeed having a serious debate over whether living things had common ancestors, obviously teachers could teach that, but they aren't. But of course, the first scientific alternative to evolution naturally was creation science, which was struck down. The second, of course, was intelligent design. And there was a court case in Dover, Pennsylvania, the Middle District of Pennsylvania in 2005, in which a full trial was held, in which the best scientists for intelligent design on the planet, Michael Behe and Dr. Minnick from Idaho, made the best case for intelligent design as a science and failed. Not because these are not bright men and not because they're not very sincere, but because there's no there there. You can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. There's no good science in intelligent design. I'm kind of sorry for them. Intelligent design it's not a science. It is clearly a religious idea. To teach it in the public schools would be, as in teaching creation science, advocacy of religion, and so the judge struck down the Dover policy. Now, Justice Scalia had another little line in his dissent where he said that the parents of Louisiana, remember this was a Louisiana law, the parents of Louisiana have every right to teach the evidence against evolution, just as Scopes had every right to teach the evidence for it. And this has been seized upon with great enthusiasm by intelligent design and also creation science proponents. Now, if you were to go to the geology and biology departments here and say, Dr. Beaton, could you please provide me with a list of the evidence against evolution so I can take it into my high school class and teach it? she would probably look at you with a certain amount of puzzlement because, you know, in her drawer she does not have that list of evidence against evolution. This is sort of a mysterious thing. This is like the evidence against heliocentrism. We don't have a list of evidence against the idea that the planets go around the sun. Is the done deal. Where you find the evidence against evolution, of course, is in the creation science and intelligent design literature. And again, the argument here is evidence against evolution is evidence for creationism. Where we found some of the first evidence of this approach as a political strategy was in the Ohio Science Education Standards in 2002, where under the influence of the intelligent design creationists, the committee drawing up the standards of the Board of Education came up with a standard for the 10th grade biology courses, describe how scientists continue to investigate and critically analyze aspects of evolutionary theory, which sounds, it's worded kind of funny, but it doesn't sound terribly offensive particularly. It sounds like, you know, it's kind of a critical thinking, you know, raise your hand if you don't want your kids to be critical thinkers. Obviously, we all want our kids to be critical thinkers. That's not a problem. But having been there and worked with the Ohio Citizen for Science, I know what went into crafting this statement. And boy, with the politicization of education in this country, believe me, every statement like this is carefully crafted to try to satisfy as many audiences as possible. The pro-evolution side said, oh, what this means, analyze aspects of evolutionary theory. What this means is that students will weigh sort of, you know, allopatric and sympatric speciation, or they will weigh punctuated equilibrium and gradualism. They'll be talking about elements of evolution, the details of evolution. And of course, the creationists are saying, nah, critically analyze evolution. In other words, criticize evolution. And in fact, this was exactly the position taken by the intelligent design proponents. Philip Johnson, who's a major strategist for intelligent design, mentioned that the recent decision of the Ohio Standards Committee is a big breakthrough. Critics are calling it a compromise, but it isn't. It's our position. It allows teachers to present evidence against the theory of evolution. So in their minds, that innocuously worded standard was really a foot in the door to try to teach evidence against evolution. The good news is that Ohio rescinded that standard actually after the Dover trial, realizing that it was really just a way to try to split intelligent design into the curriculum. The Discovery Institute started circulating a model policy in 2003. We found evidence of it in the discovery procedures for the Kitzmiller versus Dover trial. The policy read, teachers in their discretion may encourage students to consider both the scientific strengths and weaknesses of evolutionary theory in order to better understand the assigned curriculum. This policy does not call for the study of creationism nor intelligent design. This, again, is very cleverly worded. They have far more lawyers working at the Discovery Institute, which is the think tank for intelligent design. They have many more lawyers working there than biologists, believe me. Again, the whole approach here these days is to talk about discrediting evolution, strengths and weaknesses of evolution, couch the whole argument in terms of critical thinking, of getting the students to weigh the evidence, because it sounds it sounds like such good pedagogy. But of course, what you're actually trying to do is get students to waste time arguing about something that's really already settled. It's a great idea for students to exercise their critical thinking abilities. We should be doing that. But we should be having students exercise their critical thinking abilities about topics that are actually in contention. Why argue about whether the Earth is flat or spherical? Let's have them argue about let's have them argue about warm-blooded versus cold-blooded dinosaurs. That's a real fun one. You can talk about histology, you can talk about anatomy, you can talk about footprint length, you can talk about all kinds of stuff. You can do some real hands-on inquiry learning with that. But debating whether or not evolution took place, come on, that's a waste of time. Notice also, the policy doesn't call for the study of creationism. You can teach it if you want to, but you don't have to. There's all kinds of interesting wording here. And in fact, in Grantsburg, Wisconsin, not too far from here, in 2004, the Grantsburg School Board did pass a policy that was modeled upon the Discovery Institute policy. Now, this evidence against evolution strategy is something that has been making the rounds for quite a while. Critically analyze evidence for evolution is the wording in Ohio, as I just showed you. We don't have time to show you what's going on all over the country. Strengths and weaknesses is language that's used in Texas, especially very recently. We find wording such as evidence for and evidence against. Present evolution as theory, not fact. That's a set of terms of art right there, too. I always say, well, of course evolution is a theory. Theories explain facts. But of course, that's not how these policies are written. That's not what these policies mean. When these policies are written, evolution must be taught as theory, not fact. They're using theory not as a scientist would use the word theory, but theory as the term is used on the street to mean guess or hunch or something that's disposable or unimportant or something you don't have to spend any time on. It's a throwaway idea. It's a theory in crisis, not theory as in well-supported explanation, which is how scientists look at theories. Now, gravitation is a theory. Teach the full range of views about origins is a phrase that comes out of an amendment to the No Child Left Behind Act, that was submitted by Senator Santorum of Pennsylvania back in 2000. It never got adopted into the No Child Left Behind Act. It was buried down in the depths of the committee report and has no legal value whatsoever. But creationists keep arguing and keep proposing that the No Child Left Behind Education Act requires the teaching of the full range of views about origins, even though there's no legal right for that whatsoever. Again, the full range of views is a wink and a nod. That means creationism, without mentioning it in so many words. And teach the controversy is intelligent design speak from the Discovery Institute for teach students that scientists are debating whether or not evolution took place. It's ambiguous wording because when you hear it, you think, well, maybe this is a critical thinking kind of argument. All of these euphemisms are really a way of teaching bad science in the name of fairness. Because frankly, if you are teaching students that one of the major important ideas of science, and not just biology, but science, really. We've been talking about evolutionary biology today, but really the idea of evolution is basic to science as a whole. Evolution in the broadest sense is the idea that the universe has had a history. So astronomy is an evolutionary science, and geology is an evolutionary science. Specifically, when we're talking about biology, we're talking about this inference of common ancestry. But if you're tossing out biological evolution, you've got to toss out the whole number, and then you're tossing out virtually all the science. So if we're teaching students that evolution is an idea that you can just dispense with, we are teaching students, we are crippling students for any kind of actual accurate understanding of science. And I think that is something we should be very loath to do. But indeed, as expressed in this article about the adoption of the Texas standards in this paragraph here, playing to the American sense of fairness, lawmakers across the country have tried to require that classrooms be open to all views. There is a movement to have academic freedom acts passed. You can go online and go to academicfreedomact.org and read this at your leisure. Please don't try to read it now, you'll go blind. This is very small print. Academic freedom acts are attempts to try to couch creationism in terms of academic freedom of teachers to teach and students to learn. We've had quite a number of these items of legislation. I haven't updated this chart yet, but in 2010 we've had 2 so far. Just brand new in Kentucky a day or so ago, and a bill in South Carolina. The 2 bills with asterisks are academic freedom acts. The other were just sort of general garden variety anti-evolution bills so far this year. But notice how the framing of these academic freedom acts, let me teach, says the teacher. Don't hobble me. I want to supplement my science class with current articles and balanced. Anytime you hear the word balanced, you know where that's coming from. That's code. That's code. That's creationism. But you know, the framing here is just beautiful. I mean, it's really very well done. the teacher wants to be balanced, it wants to be so fair. Americans are fair people. This is playing right into cultural values of American people. But think about this. Is it really fair to miseducate students? Because that's really what this is all about. What's really fair? What's really fair to our kids is to give them a really good science education so they can go out and go to college and get good jobs in science, because the current 21st century is going to be the century of biology. This is where all the jobs are going to be. And why are we crippling our kids for these jobs by teaching them this wacko science? That evolution is a theory in crisis. This is crazy. And it's couched about, poor little students, let me think. Why can't I be allowed to decide for myself what the truth is? No, honey, that's not what it's all about. In high school, your job is to learn the consensus view of science. That's all a high school teacher's trying to do. They don't teach string theory in high school, okay? They teach